It was a week before Christmas, and the bitter cold had settled over our summer house in the Hamptons. Most of the neighboring mansions stood empty this time of year, their wealthy owners retreated to warmer climates. The silence that hung over the snow-covered streets was almost suffocating. My dad and I had arrived early, ahead of my mom and sister. The house felt different in winter, bigger somehow, emptier. The creaks and groans of the old heating system echoing through vacant rooms only amplified that feeling of isolation. I spent most of that first day holed up in my room, trying to lose myself in video games. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way the winter darkness pressed against my windows, or how the wind would occasionally howl through the eaves like a distant cry. That night, a massive snowstorm hit. I lay in bed listening to the wind battering the house, watching shadows dance across my ceiling as tree branches swayed outside. When morning came, the world was buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. I was in the kitchen, still groggy from sleep, when my dad asked the question that would start it all: when did you build the snowman? My blood ran cold. What snowman? There was, standing in our backyard, a perfectly crafted snowman with stick arms raised toward the sky. But what made my skin crawl was its face. It wasn't the usual carrot nose and cold smile. No, this one had features carved directly into its head, deep, hollow eyes, and a wide, unnatural grin. And it was facing our window, staring right at us. I didn't build that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My dad laughed it off. Must be the neighbor kids, he said. But we both knew the nearest house with children was empty this time of year. That night, I was jolted awake by a sharp thump against my window. My heart nearly stopped. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to convince myself it was just snow falling from the roof. 5 minutes passed before I gathered the courage to look. I screamed. There was another snowman, right outside my window. But this one wasn't smiling. Its carved face bore a twisted, angry frown, the eyes seeming to glare directly into mine. The morning light revealed no footprints in the snow around it. My dad checked with the neighbors the next day. Just as we knew, they weren't in town. Nobody was. For almost a week, nothing happened. We tried to forget about it as the rest of our family arrived for Christmas. But on Christmas Eve, as we sat in the warmly lit living room, there was a knock at the door. "Who is it?" my dad called out. A voice responded, soft and pleading, "Please, let me in. I need help. I have no one to spend Christmas with." The door had no peephole, no window to see who or what was outside. Just solid wood between us and whoever was out there. "Please," the voice begged. "I just want to spend Christmas with someone." My dad threatened to call the police, and the voice fell silent. We didn't sleep that night. Christmas morning, we found a note taped to our door. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. "I just wanted to have a little fun. I built the snowman for the boy in the house. I don't have anyone to spend the holiday with." We never found out who it was. But sometimes on cold winter nights, I still check outside my window, just to make sure there isn't a snowman staring back at me. And I never look at their carved faces the same way again. Christmas in Miami feels wrong somehow. The palm trees wrapped in lights, the warm breeze carrying the scent of salt water. It all seems like some bizarre dream when you're used to snow and freezing temperatures back in Connecticut. My brother Nico and I were staying at our Uncle Jishua's place downtown for the holidays. Being young and restless, I was 21, he was 18 with a fake ID burning a hole in his wallet, we couldn't resist the allure of Miami's notorious nightlife. The city was alive with Christmas-themed parties, streets filled with people wearing Santa hats in the humid night air. Our first attempt at a club ended in failure. A sharp-eyed bouncer spotted Nico's fake ID immediately. But we found better luck at a smaller bar a few blocks away. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and everyone seemed caught up in that strange mix of holiday cheer and tropical heat. That's when she appeared. She must have been in her mid-40s, wearing that left little to the imagination, a blue Santa hat perched at an angle that seemed calculated. The way she zeroed in on Nico made my skin crawl, something predatory in her smile as she commented on his Hispanic accent. I should have stopped it. Should have trusted that uneasy feeling in my gut. But I let Nico do his thing, making small talk with the guy next to me at the bar until my brother patted my shoulder. "I'm heading out with her," he said, grinning like he'd won some prize. The call came during my Uber ride home. Static filled my ears, but through it, I heard male voices. Then shouting. Then my brother screaming my name. The next call came from a man with a voice like gravel, claiming he'd found the phone on the sidewalk. In the background, I heard Nico screaming for help before the line went dead. The night became a blur of police lights and panic. When we finally found Nico on a dark street in North Miami, his face was a mess of blood and bruises. The story spilled out between gasps, the woman's Uber that wasn't an Uber at all, but a trap. 2 men in the car. Threats of shooting him if he made a sound. They took everything he had: wallet, phone, keys. He only escaped because they got careless for a moment. The security footage from the bar showed the woman clearly, but she was never identified. The men never wore masks. They hadn't planned on letting him live to describe them. Christmas dinner the next day felt hollow, everyone trying to pretend things were normal. But that night, we all woke to Nico's screams. "She's in the house." It was just a nightmare, but I'll never forget his face in that moment, or the way that woman had smiled at the bar like a spider watching a fly alight in its web. The police never found them. Sometimes I wonder how many other young men she's lured in with that same blue Santa hat and predatory smile. How many weren't lucky enough to escape? And every Christmas in Miami, I check the faces in the crowd, half expecting to see her there still hunting. Our house sits at the edge of the woods. My brother George and I bought it together a couple years back. Nothing fancy, just a small place with enough room for family gatherings. That first Christmas, we decided to host everyone, partly to show off our new home, partly to bring the family together again. The house felt alive that night. The warmth of conversation mixed with the smell of holiday cooking, wine glasses clinked in the living room, and my sister's dog Mika dozed contentedly by the fireplace. Even the recent news of bodies being found in the nearby woods couldn't dampen our spirits, though my mom quickly changed the subject when it came up, glancing nervously at my young nephews. As the night wore on, family members slowly trickled out until only my sister's family remained to stay over, along with my girlfriend, and joined us late. The house settled into that peaceful quiet that comes after a successful gathering, broken only by the soft whisper of wind through the trees outside. I was deep asleep when my girlfriend shook me awake. The bedroom was pitch black, the digital clock reading 2, something in harsh red numbers. Before I could ask what was wrong, I heard it: Mika growling in the hallway, a low threatening sound I'd never heard from her before. The cold hit me first when I stepped into the hall. Our back door stood wide open with our air pouring in. Mika stood rigid, staring out into the darkness, still growling. That's when I heard it, my brother's voice calling my name from somewhere in the woods. He sounded distant, maybe in trouble. I quickly pulled on boots and a coat, grabbing a flashlight before heading out. Fresh snow showed clear footprints leading from our back deck into the tree line. I called out George's name. His voice answered, still distant: "Help." I followed the tracks into the woods, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But something was wrong. The footprints began to fade, becoming less and less distinct until they vanished completely. Yet George's voice kept calling, always the same distance away, no matter how far I walked. My phone rang, my girlfriend's number. "Chet," she said, her voice shaking. "George is in his bedroom right now." The woods suddenly felt different. Hostile. The darkness between the trees seemed to pulse with hidden movement. The voice that had been calling me George's voice, but not George, called out one more time, closer now. Much closer. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted back toward the house, that familiar but wrong voice echoing through the trees behind me. I didn't stop until I burst through the back door, slamming it shut. Everyone was awake now, gathered in the living room. George stood there, pale-faced, very much not in the woods. The police came, took statements, asked questions about the footprints leading into the woods and the open door. They found nothing. We never did figure out what happened that night. Some say it might be connected to those bodies they found in the woods, but I don't know. What I do know is that something out there knew my name, knew my brother's voice, and tried to lure me into the darkness. The woods are still there, pressing against our house. Sometimes at night I think I hear voices calling. But I never answer anymore, and I never go out to check. The gentle hum of Christmas music filled our duplex as my family gathered around the dining table for our Christmas Eve dinner. Steam rose from the golden turkey, and the warm aroma of stuffing mixed with the pine scent from our decorated tree. It was an intimate affair, just my grandparents and uncles from my mom's side. What made our duplex unique, and somewhat unsettling, was the connecting door between our unit and our neighbors. Unlike typical duplexes, this door could open from either side but required both sides to be unlocked to open. The sound started while we were eating. At first it was subtle, the metallic scraping of the doorknob turning. Then it became more deliberate, more persistent. The twisting and turning continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. The cheerful dinner conversation died instantly, replaced by the sound of metal grinding against metal. My dad rose from his chair, his expression tense. The floorboards creaked under his feet as he approached the door. "You need something?" he called out, his voice steady despite the unusual situation. Silence was the only response. The click of our lock echoed through the now silent room as my dad unlocked our side. The door swung open to reveal an impenetrable darkness. The kind of darkness that seems to swallow light whole. We knew our neighbors had left earlier, their car was gone, and it was only 6 p.m. Being responsible neighbors, we feared the worst. My dad, uncle, and I ventured into their side to investigate. The light switches clicked on, illuminating the empty rooms one by one. Everything seemed normal until we heard a distinct thud followed by an ominous crack from upstairs. Someone was walking on the floorboards above us. My heart pounded in my chest as my dad and uncle rushed upstairs. I remained frozen below, my ears straining to hear what was happening. Suddenly, a commotion erupted upstairs, followed by my uncle's blood-curdling scream that seemed to shake the entire duplex. My family jumped from their seats at the dinner table as my dad and uncle came thundering down the stairs. My uncle's hand was pressed against his shoulder, dark blood seeping between his fingers. He barely made it back to our side and locked the door before the ramming started. The sound of a body throwing itself against the door was deafening. Each impact sent splinters of wood flying as cracks began forming in the door. A man's grunts and screams on the other side sounded inhuman, desperate. My dad and other uncle grabbed kitchen knives while I armed myself as well, our hands trembling as we prepared for the worst. The pounding continued until suddenly it stopped. Through our window, we watched as the man ran through the snow, his face turning to look at us one last time before he sped away in his black Honda Civic. But the real horror came the following year. Those same neighbors were having a Christmas gathering, and through my bedroom window, I recognized one of their guests, the same man who had attacked us. When confronted, they defended him, claiming he was from out of state. We moved out a month later, our fear of those neighbors had grown too intense to bear. To this day, I still wonder what sinister game they were playing, or why they invited back the man who had violently invaded their home on Christmas Eve. It was Christmas Eve when I first encountered Francis's sister. We had just moved into our Queens duplex, and our new neighbors to middle-aged women had arrived only days before. I'd managed to briefly meet Francis during one of her hurried trips between car and house, but something about her demeanor suggested she was keeping her distance intentionally. The incident began during our family Christmas Eve dinner. The scraping sound at our front door cut through the festive atmosphere like a knife. When I opened it, I caught only a glimpse of a tall figure retreating down our snow-dusted sidewalk. I dismissed it as someone having the wrong house, trying to maintain the evening's warmth and cheer. After our guests left around 9, the real horror began. The sound of our front door slamming echoed through the house while I was washing dishes, the running water nearly masking the intrusion. I assumed it was my wife or one of my sisters returning for a forgotten item. But when my wife answered from another room, my hands froze in the soapy water. The living room was dimly lit by our Christmas tree lights when I entered. There in my recliner sat a woman I didn't know, muttering incomprehensibly to herself while staring at our wall. The Christmas lights cast strange shadows across her face, making her expression seem to shift between vacant and menacing. My wife's gasp behind me broke the surreal moment. Frances arrived quickly to retrieve her sister, explaining about the sundowning syndrome, a form of dementia that worsens after dark. Her warning about leaving her sister alone when she acts up sent a chill down my spine. We locked our doors that night, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter. The next night, after returning late from Christmas dinner at my wife's parents', we thought the strange incident was behind us. The comfort of our bed and the soft glow of late-night Christmas movies lulled us into a false sense of security. But in the dead of night, my eyes snapped open to movement in our darkened bedroom. A tall, skeletal figure glided past our bed and into the hallway. "Honey, are you okay?" I whispered, only to hear my wife's groggy response beside me. My blood ran cold as I realized who it must be. In the hallway, I confronted the gaunt silhouette of Francis's sister, her outline barely visible in the darkness. When I slammed our bedroom door, her transformation was instant. Gone was the confused wanderer, replaced by something feral. She hurled herself against our door repeatedly, making sounds no human should make. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911, my wife clutching my arm as we listened to the violent impacts against our door. The police found her in our basement, moving through the darkness like some creature of the night. Frances came to collect her again, but this time I made it clear one more incident and I would press charges. Shortly after, Frances's sister went to live with their mother instead. But sometimes on quiet nights, I still lie awake, straining to hear footsteps in our house. And when I check our basement door, I can't shake the feeling that something is waiting down there in the darkness, remembering the path to our bedroom. The winter of 2010 brought more than just snow to our neighborhood. My father had always been passionate about Christmas lights, treating our house's holiday display like an art installation. That year, he'd outdone himself with lights synchronized to Christmas music, a trend that was just taking off. Our house became a beacon in the darkness, drawing admirers from all around. On this particular night, delicate snowflakes drifted down from the cloudy sky, each one catching the colorful glow of our display. The temperature had dropped below freezing, turning our breath into visible puffs in the crisp air. Despite the cold, we still had a few onlookers stopping by. A woman briefly admired the show before continuing on her way, but one man remained, his face illuminated by the shifting colors of our display. I watched him from our living room window. His expression showed genuine joy as he watched the lights dance to the music, and I could tell my father was pleased to have such an appreciative audience. As the night grew later and the snowfall intensified, my father finally decided to shut everything down. The sudden darkness felt heavy after hours of twinkling lights. Everyone headed upstairs for our nighttime routines, but something compelled me to look out my bedroom window. The street was mostly dark now, with only a few houses still displaying their lights. That's when I noticed him. The man who had been watching our display was still there, standing motionless on the sidewalk, staring at our now dark house. Something about his stillness sent a chill through my body that had nothing to do with the winter air. I called my father over, and we both watched the mysterious figure. "What do you think he's doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father suggested lowering the blinds and ignoring him, assuring me he'd eventually leave. But curiosity got the better of me. After getting ready for bed, I couldn't resist peeking through my blinds one more time. The man was gone, but what I saw instead made my stomach drop. Fresh footprints in the snow lead from the sidewalk onto our front lawn. The soft tap of snowflakes against my window drew me downstairs to investigate further. Our front door had 3 square windows at the top, and as I approached to look through them, my blood turned to ice. There he stood on our doorstep, his face inches from the glass, staring directly at me with an unsettling smile that created deep creases around his eyes. His wool cap was dusted with snow, and his black coat seemed to absorb what little light remained. But it was his eyes that haunted me. They held a maniacal gleam that triggered my scream. My family rushed downstairs as the man retreated, crossing the street toward the park. Without stopping for coats, we chased after him, following his footprints through the biting cold. The trail led us into a grove of trees where the snow hadn't accumulated enough to leave prints. As we stood there shivering, I couldn't shake the image of his face from my mind. He never learned who he was or what he wanted. Was he simply a troubled soul drawn to the lights, or something more sinister? That Christmas, our spectacular light display became a beacon not just for holiday cheer, but for something darker that lurked in the shadows of our festive neighborhood.